Awesome. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the NASSCOM's Design and Engineering Summit. For those people who have come in from other cities, welcome to Bangalore. Bangalore is awesome. Besides the traffic, we have some amazing things, especially try the Visible bath out here. So welcome, and it's going to be an amazing 2 days, ladies and gentlemen. It's going to be a mixture of a lot of deep dive conversations, master classes, plenary sessions, some amazing conversations that you're going to witness today. So gear up for that. With no further delay, let's start with our first master class. We will be talking about designing with data. I'm not going to talk more about it. We have amazing speakers here today. But to introduce the conversation, introduce the track, and take the track forward, I would like to call upon on stage Mr. Prakash Bodla, who is the Vice President Engineering and Center Head for Hyderabad Research and Design Center, the HRDC, an engineering research wing of United Technologies Corporations. Prakash, if you could join us on stage here. So before I hand it over to Prakash, let me give you a small bit of what Prakash does in UTC. Prakash was instrumental in building the Research and Engineering Center from ground zero. The team also specializes in product integrations and also created centers of excellence on embedded software and mobile to leverage across the various platforms. Prior to UTC, Prakash held executive positions at General Electric and Sun Microsystems in USA, and he did his master's in international business and marketing from Santa Carla University in USA. And with no further delay, Prakash, the stage is all yours.
All right. Morning all. How is the team doing? Good? Excellent. We have a great speaker this morning with Patrick talking about data, right? I had the privilege of actually sitting with Patrick in terms of what exactly do they do, and I was a little mesmerized, a little perplexed, but more importantly, I learned a whole bunch of things in that half an hour that I actually sat with Patrick. But quickly, it is said that the information is going to be coming from the tap, right? I mean, that is the kind of the information that we are actually talking about. And the data that we are talking is actually transforming everything from business to our personal lives, right? Some quick statistics I pulled up. By 2020, there are going to be about 4 billion people that are going to be getting connected, maybe through the smartphones, etc. But that's actually going to be generating about $4 trillion, the US dollars, on an annualized basis, right? And with about 25 plus billion intelligent devices, vehicles, sensors, motors, anything that you're actually talking about, all these devices actually streaming out the data day in and day out. And there are a whole bunch of things that are actually going on. Probably we'll be talking in the session 2 immediately after the Patrick in terms of what are the dynamics that are happening and how is that evolving into the automotive industry, right? We are talking about the autonomous cars, right? But if you actually take a look from the company's perspective as well, the companies that had been actually investing primarily in the product design development, any of these big companies or the small companies, currently about 52% of the money, the R&D money, is actually spent on the product, and about 48% of the money is spent on the services, the service engine. How do we generate more money out of the services? 10 years from now, the total amount that is going to be spent on the actual product design and development is dropping to something like 38%, right? From 52, it's actually coming to 38%, and about 62% or 65% of the money that the R&D companies are going to be investing is primarily going to be on the services. And why are the companies going to be investing on the services is they want to see how do they actually increase their margins and how do they actually create more value for the products that they already design. And the products, for example, United Technologies, we are into Otis elevators, carrier air conditioning, fire detection, security, Pratt & Whitney aeroplane engines, etc. And so there are many other companies just in the same market space like a General Electric, like a Honeywell, etc. But everybody is now taking a look into, we have all these products and how do we make more sense of that can actually create that intelligence and provide to our end customers. As a result, our margins goes up. As a result, there's more intelligence that's with our end customers, right? As a result, the entire companies are actually transforming, and as a result, the service investments are going to be generating a lot of these service-based models, service-based innovations. What has actually happened is we are talking about the big data and the artificial intelligence, neural networks, etc. These are not off the cuff. These are not like a 1 year, 2 year, 5 year kind of a products, but we are actually talking about the engineering for all these products have actually been going on over the last 30 years, 40 years, etc. But there are few dynamics that have actually changed. As a result, it is actually coming to the common layman. It is actually coming on to become a day-to-day affair. For example, I mean, we have a Google Home in the house. We have an Alexa in the house, which is a huge artificial intelligence, right? And a natural language processing kind of an instrument that you can actually purchase for like $100 a piece, right? So there is so much of data actually coming in, and that is actually changing how the data is coming in. As a result, how the companies needs to be innovating, right? And with the data and the innovation, now we need to actually take this step forward to say that what should be the strategy in terms of how do we actually design and develop the products that can leverage this, right? Typically, a lot of companies create the product and then they actually think about how do I then now integrate or what do I need to do with the data that's actually coming on. But I think Patrick is going to talk with a few great examples in terms of what you need to do. As a result, you'll be in a position to actually think the product from phase one itself, right? With that, I would like to actually introduce Patrick Newbery from GlobalLogic. He's the Chief Strategy Officer and also the Chief Digital Officer. Since 2014, Patrick has been playing a dual role as a Methods Chief Strategy Officer while leading the digital practices for GlobalLogic, a San Francisco-based company. Closely working with the global businesses to help them understand how design and technology are reshaping our world. In this capacity, he works with executives on how developments affect the businesses as they transform themselves to become more competitive in an age where software lies at the heart of the modern value chain, mediating customer experiences and the actual engagements. He has led strategic and creative initiatives for the diverse range of companies and industries, has helped clients reposition global brands, shift from a product focus to a service focus, and develop omni-channel experience strategies that adapt to the shifts in the customer expectations. He has also led innovation efforts, helped product commercialize in the emerging technologies, and incubate new businesses. With that, without further ado, Patrick, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming today. As my slide says, I am Patrick Newbery, Chief Digital Officer of GlobalLogic. I'm also Chief Strategy Officer of Method. Now, Method is a design agency that started in San Francisco in 1999. And we were founded with the approach that with digital technology, with changes in the way the business used design and brand experiences, you needed to look across everything the business did. So we had worked with virtually every technology company that you've heard of in the Valley since 1999. We were acquired by GlobalLogic in 2011. So I've been playing a dual role since that time. So, for those of you that don't know who GlobalLogic is, GlobalLogic helps today's global brands figure out how to become tomorrow's digital businesses. We combine both strategic design and complex engineering to imagine what's possible and help companies identify the products and services and capabilities that will be their next generation business. And today I'm going to talk about designing with data. Now, I don't mean data-driven design. Right? And I'll explain the difference as we go along here. I think data-driven design is very interesting. I had the opportunity to work with Autodesk for about 7 years, and they do a lot of data-driven design. So when you think about product lifecycle management, about designing in CAD, CAM, all the way through to how this affects how it lives in the real world. They had a great story about earth graders that using GIS data and centralized planning could automatically grade an acre to within 3 millimeters of the desired plane, computer-driven. So that's a level of kind of data-driven design that's very interesting and important, but that's very much focused kind of on industrial uses, business to business, and I want to speak more broadly about designing with data. Because as Prakash says, we are awash in data today, and it's only going to get more and more. If you think about all of the devices today and the data, now think about everything coming with IoT. Think about every car in the world potentially being a source of both consuming data and generating data, every house, all the different devices. There will be so much more data in our future. So we have to understand what this means and how we think about, from a business standpoint, creating value, creating services around data. And that's what I really want to talk about. Now, why design? Well, design matters. I think when you look at the changes in business, For a long time, people built products, you designed products, people bought them, people liked them. And there was a product life cycle that went, depending upon what business you're in, every year, every 7 years, and design kind of moved at that rate. Technology has changed things. We now live in a service-based economy in most parts of the world. Services predominate, and with a service, you're not buying once and then using. You're buying on an ongoing basis. It's recurring revenue. And if your services aren't engaging the users, as a business, your revenue goes like that. We worked with a company that was building a social platform based upon devices. And they said, well, we have 3 million devices in the world. We have a huge market. Problem was that the churn rate was so high that you could calculate mathematically, you will actually move through that entire population of device owners within about a year because people don't like your service. That's a bad place to be in. So businesses have to be thinking about design, but don't just take my word for it. If you look at how companies perform, companies that are design-centric do a lot better. They enjoy a 228% premium over companies that don't have design-centric approaches. What does design-centric mean? Well, it means that design is represented in the corporate structure. There are positions that are responsible for ensuring design. It means that design is part of the process, part of the thinking, and that there's a commitment to thinking about how you create a better world through design. So design matters because business is under transformation. As I said, we're moving from products to services, but virtually every business today is finding out that they're having to adapt to a new context. And this new context is basically that the relationship between the business and technology is shifting. It used to be that technology was owned by IT. It was about internal efficiency and cost focus. But now technology is really about your revenue and engagement. It's a new set of owners. And this is the space that we're talking about. And this is where design becomes much more critical. The other thing about this context is it's reframing competition, because the companies that have grown up in the past 5 to 7 years don't have that legacy thinking about what technology is. The digital natives, the digital disruptors, are actually coming together with business, design, and technology working in concert. And it creates a competitive gap where the digital disruptors understand how to create the kind of value to business and speed of deployment that the incumbents can't keep up with. We see this time and time again where companies are saying, we have to not only change our products and services, but we have to change our culture. We don't know how to do this. In this new context, there are 3 critical things. There is continuous delivery. So whereas you might have used to release a product every year, every 2 years, even software companies every year, now companies like LinkedIn are releasing product on a daily or weekly basis. So how do you keep up that pace? Secondly, customer centricity. So again, in a service-based economy, it's the value of the moment that matters. It's not what I bought, but it's what am I getting? Because if I don't like it, I'm going to stop paying for it. So the customer is becoming king. And the last, creative destruction, is really important to what we're talking about today, designing with data. Because as you embrace the shift in the relationship of business and technology, what you find is that the existing business models and economic models get disrupted. They go away, right? So you have to figure out, where are we going next? You have to reinvent your future. So you can think about today's business as really being about running a software-driven value chain with digital channels of engagement. And I think when you take that perspective, you realize that every business has got to understand technology, has got to understand how to build software, has got to understand how to create that value, because essentially, this is what is going on. So that's, in this context, if you are building a data-driven value chain with digital engagement, data matters. Why does data matter? Well, data is the thing that connects everything. Data is where value comes from. It's a material that we can work with. As we know, there's tons of data generated on a daily basis. At the same time, the cost of processing is dropping through the floor, right? When I first got into computing about 20 years ago, I remember buying a 500 megabyte hard drive for $1,000. If you think about the new iPhone for $1,000, the difference in capabilities is amazing. So the cost of processing, the cost of memory, the cost of storage, all of these are coming down at dramatic rates. What that means is that we will actually be able to work with a lot more data than we've ever thought about. We'll be able to work with data in ways that we never dreamed of, and we'll have to do that. So that number of terabytes actually translates to this number of bytes per day. That's a huge number. And again, we're just at the beginning of this, right? We think about the number of IoT devices that can be in a connected home. Think about the amount of data that we're now going to be generating. Think about all the different services that come off of today's mobile phones. So one of the other things that's changing in the world of business is, as Prakash mentioned, the product margins are going down. Product costs go down as well, but then the margins go down because as your cost goes down, your competition can come up. So all of a sudden now, as my price drops, as I have more users, I also have to think about where's my future going. The other thing that's interesting about today is that platforms create scalable value. So thinking about Metcalfe's law, about the value of a network increasing based upon the nodes, the value of the platform is increasing based upon the number of participants. And this is key for businesses to understand. When you shift from a product mentality to a platform mentality, you have to have a different strategy on how you create value. You have different opportunities. And the interesting thing is that when you think about what we said about product cost, you realize that actually my platform and data strategy creates multiple monetization opportunities. As my platform grows, I've got multiple opportunities to create new products and services off the data that that ecosystem is generating. And this is the future for platform-based businesses. Now, to design this way, to think about how you create value, requires a different way of thinking. And that's what I want to talk about today. We have a little bit of a lag between when I click and when the slide changes. But every interaction that a digital business, that a user has with a digital business creates what you might call positive externalities. So think about Amazon. When you're shopping on Amazon, everything that you look at, everything you buy, is part of an externality to their core business, which is about selling things and getting them to you. But that data can be used to then show other customers, hey, if you're looking at this, other people that look at this bought this as well, right? Facebook is another example. So you click like, right? I like that. I want to share it with my friends. But they're creating a data profile. How many people here know about Cambridge Analytics? So Cambridge Analytics played a significant role in the latest US elections. And one of the things that they were able to do was in working with that kind of data to understand not just who you want to reach with a message, but based upon their behavior, what kind of message you should put in front of them. So they're able to really sub-segment down. And an issue like gun control, which is very big in the US, we have a huge problem with guns. The problem is also that many people believe that they should have a right to own a gun. Well, Cambridge Analytica allows you to say, if I want to have people support no gun control, what's the best way to do it? Well, for one person, Bob, he might be a hunter, right? So the message for him is about your independence, your ruggedness. You have the right to go out and do what you want to do. To another person, Sue, who lives in the city, she may be scared about crime. The message is about, if you take guns away, only criminals will have guns. So the ability to take those positive externalities and use them to create value. I mean, Cambridge Analytica has a huge opportunity to create a lot of value, a lot of money for businesses using this kind of technique. So as the platform grows, the value of these positive externalities grow as well. We don't think about positive externalities because when you think about designing products and services today, we think about a particular set of needs and a particular way of accomplishing or meeting those needs. The positive externalities are things that we only kind of think about after the fact. And that's what we need to start changing. We need to think about them as we begin. And this is why we have to start thinking about designing with data. Because when you understand the role that data plays, when you understand the nature of platform business, it should be changing the way you think about products, it should be changing the way you think about your customers, and it should be changing the way that you think about innovation and your strategy for growth. But to get there, we need to understand how to think about design, because it influences how we think about data. Now, I'm going to talk about different levels of design, and we'll talk about the role that data plays at those different levels. we also should think about the data value chain. So I use the word data to cover a broad range of things, but I like to talk about this kind of relationship between data that leads to information, that leads to insights, that leads to knowledge, that leads to wisdom. And ideally, someday, we'll be using data and we can all be very wise, right? But right now, I'm going to kind of use data to talk about at least these three levels. How many people know of Splunk? So I know the founders of Splunk. I worked with them at their previous startup, and they came to me early on with a prototype. And they said, you know, we want you to think about what the user experience for this might be. And I said, okay, so what is it? And they pulled up an interface, and they typed in something to a search field. And the search results came back, which was a page of numbers. And I said, what am I looking at? And they said, well, basically what we're doing is we're looking across an entire IT infrastructure, and we're pulling back references. I said, but it doesn't mean anything. He said, well, it will over time. To the IT professional, this is all data that means something to them. But eventually what we hope to be able to do is leverage this so that you can do a search and get any level of granularity. So that's where that data value chain, data into information, into insights begins to come into play. So think about that as we talk about data today. But in thinking about what is going on with business, why design matters, and why designing with data is important, we have to think about the context in which businesses are operating today. So I said that the relationship to technology is changing, but also business structure, business organization, and the things that people have to think about is changing. So what we see as people begin to embrace technology and software, you have to have a product and service strategy and capability. You have to be able to build things that people want and care about, right? This is where the competition exists today around design. How do you create the right things? Secondly, you have to have modern software development, right? If you're going to do continuous delivery, continuous deployment, you have to be operating in a way with DevOps, RunOps, different approaches, Agile, that really make that possible. And it has to be connected to the product and service strategy. You have to have the right kind of platform architecture. So you have to have the scalability. You have to have the ability to kind of work across and build ecosystems. You have to have data strategy. You have to be thinking about what are we doing with data and why. A friend of mine works for eBay, and we were talking the other day, and he said, you know, I was there talking with them the other day, and I thought, wow, you guys have a very interesting asset. You have pricing information about all kinds of products, from new products to used products, every sector. You've got a decade's worth of data. What can you do with that? I mean, you should be able to create pricing models, understanding, you know, what markets are looking for and why. No, we can't. Unfortunately, the cost of saving those Oracle images is too high, so we dump them. So again, thinking about that data strategy early on is very important. And lastly, the future of the business vision. All of this connects back to that creative destruction. If you are embracing technology this way, you have to be reinventing the future of your business model because your industry is getting disrupted, everything is changing. So all these have to be kept together. Not only do you have to develop these capabilities, but they need to work together. And that's where design can help play a role. So one thing that we see is design actually helps integrate as you're developing these new capabilities or as the world is changing. But when I speak about design, design is, again, like data, a term that people throw around, and it means lots of things. I like design because design is one of those words that is both a verb and a noun. So design is a process, and design is also the outcome. But today, I would encourage you to think about design in 3 different levels. So these levels are pragmatic design, reference design, and strategic design. Now, the commonality is design, right? The commonality is both that process and the outcome. But the way that they focus in business is different. And as I talk about these, I'll talk about the role that data plays. So when we're thinking designing with data, we're understanding that at different levels, we have to think about designing with data in different terms. Starting with level 1, designing with data for pragmatic design. So I define pragmatic design as really design working efficiently and pragmatically to ensure accuracy and quality within the requirements of products and the constraints of production. Okay? So this is an interesting concept. Now, many times as a designer, we get called in and a client says, we want you guys to think out of the box. We want some innovation in our product. We want something that's really going to capture the market. Okay, well, can we change the requirements? Nope. Can we change the deployment? No. All right? So now you're constrained down to working within a very narrow range. Now, it's important to be able to do this well, and here's where the craft of design, so the GUI designers, visual designers, UX designers is very important, because their knowledge of the tools, the knowledge of the state of the art is really what ensures quality. So pragmatic design is really focused on getting things done. In many companies today, pragmatic design is situated within a product organization, and it works very well between the business, product management, and the development teams. And this is a good advance. Companies are starting to realize how to do this. And pragmatic design plays an important role here. In this kind of setting, we have what I would call a fairly linear and standard product development process. So we identify a need, we come up with some concepts and requirements, we design the user experience, it gets built, it gets launched, it gets supported, okay? So data plays an interesting role across the spectrum if you do it correctly. There's some situations where you do it incorrectly. So you wind up producing a product that could be perfect but is not perfect. So we worked with a company that came up with a very, not necessarily unique but original idea, or an interesting idea around a wearable camera. So the concept here is that today we have cameras with us all the time, but the camera gets in our way, right? I need to take it out, I need to get the camera between me and the experience. If you've ever been to a concert, you see people sitting there with their phones or their iPads up, capturing it and not watching the concert, right? Kind of silly, but we've got the ability to capture it, but it really gets us, the camera gets in the way. So how can you create a product that allows you to capture that, to live in the moment, and not have something between you and it? Great product idea, right? The only problem was that they weren't thinking about data and information in the right way, right? They did the right step of looking at market research, so they found that, number one, wearables and fashion are coming together. So we said, aha, let's create something that will be a fashion accessory, something that looks nice. Now, if you've seen any other wearable cameras, they're kind of clunky. The GoPro is very, very kind of engineering-centric, very kind of high-tech looking. There's other ones that look a little more modern, but they're kind of nondescript. So this was meant to be something that looks very, very nice, and you might actually wear it. The other thing that they had in this is some interesting technology where the difference between video and a photograph or an image is blurred, right? So now we can be capturing on an ongoing basis in memory, in cache, and only save what you want, right? Brilliant idea. But the problem was they weren't really thinking too much about how things actually work in the real world. So number one, they thought, well, our market for this will be mothers with young children, because they're the ones who have to be hands-free. They're the ones that want to capture that young behavior, the early age things. Well, the first thing that we realized when we started talking with mothers, right, was that when they're with their toddler, when they're going out to do something, they're wearing sweats, they're wearing jeans, they're not dressing up. So the idea that you're going to have a high fashion accessory that you'll choose because it's going to go with what you wear doesn't really work, right? One of the other things that's very interesting about this is that because this is a wearable, how do you operate it? What is the control? When you take pictures today, you see an instant feedback, and then you save it, right? With this, you don't have that. So obviously, there has to be another user experience, another interface point that interacts with this. Now the question is, what's the relationship between the app on my mobile that I might get the photos and this? Good question, they said. Well, we said, well, what are these buttons for? Good question. They had actually commissioned the industrial design, had locked in this design before even thinking about what the product experience was. We asked, do you even need buttons? We don't know, but they're there, right? So there's a lot going on here from a product development standpoint that is missing the right data and information to create the right kind of product. When you look at it, when you read the story about what it could be, you're like, this is fantastic. But when you actually think about it, you missed all the right information at the right steps. Probably the most crucial one was this difference between video and still. If we're going to capture this way, right, if it's always going to be on, or if I turn it on, it's capturing until I turn it off, that drains the battery fairly quickly. If I want just stills, well then how do I activate to take the picture, right? So one of the things about this design was that they sacrificed battery life in order to get the look and feel. So actually that ability to allow you to capture video and then take stills out of it was diminished because that would kill the battery very quickly. So this is an example of what I call the hippo problem, right? Hippo is the highest paid person's opinion, right? This is where the person who is the most important says, this is what we should do, rather than thinking about data and information at various steps of the process that help you build the right product. Again, without this, the perfect product is not perfect at all. So how should they be thinking about this? Well, if you look at this process, they did the right things in terms of thinking about, in terms of need identification. They did the quantitative market research. They didn't really look at the competition deeply enough. They didn't try them out. They didn't put them on and walk around with them. So they didn't really understand what a hands-free camera was all about. Secondly, they didn't do qualitative market research. We did it after they had made lots of decisions about the product, and that's where we began to find out these problems. That's where things began to get surfaced. Now, this is about interviewing real people. This is shadowing, watching how people behave in the real world. This is doing audits, trying out products yourselves. This is about ethnographies, not just watching how people do things, but what is the context in which they're doing them. Next, product validation. So when we were working with them, we actually took GoPro cameras. We went out and tried to capture in the real world how it might be. This is where we really learned about one of the problems is if I capture all of this information, how do I manage it, right? It's great that it's hands-free, but I'm just building a backlog of data and information that I have to work with. So thinking about how you prototype. You can prototype very early with paper, or you can put together rough prototypes and really understand how things work. You can uncover a lot of what might seem edge case or corner cases, but actually are very crucial to product success. You can also do a very interesting thing, which is participatory design. If I'm working with a real user, a real potential customer in a prototyping situation, if something doesn't work or doesn't make sense, I can ask them. I can say, what did you expect? What would have made more sense, right? So if I only do this here, right, we're already committed, right? If I'm thinking about collecting this, it's going to affect how I think about concepts. So again, thinking about, even in pragmatic product design, where do I get information and data? How am I using it? Then, of course, we've got, during engineering, we will have usability testing. So here we're really looking at, does it perform the way that we intended it? And this is literally about the raw performance. Is it timely? Is it robust? Does it do the things we want it to do? There's execution. Did we get it right? Does it make sense? Did we lead people into corners that they can't get out of? And then lastly, cognitive processes. Does it fit with their mental model? Does it make sense to them? We were working on a business application, and the design organization within the client company had designed an interface and rolled it out. And what happened when people used it was like, wait a second, I've been using this for 15 years and there's a certain field tab order that I'm used to. You've completely disrupted that. The cognitive disruption that happens in that situation will actually add a lot of time and inefficiency to a process. So you have to be thinking about this. And then, of course, lastly, there is the use logs. What happens once you've launched and supporting it? Are you hitting your KPIs? But also, what are the kinds of behaviors? What is the kind of segmentation? What's the adoption and churn rates looking like? So in pragmatic design, when looking across the product lifecycle, there's a lot of data and information that we should be collecting using in the right stages. If we don't, we build products that don't work very well. Typically, people focus here, and then they focus on here. But thinking throughout is crucial. One example of this, we were working with a company on blood glucose monitoring for diabetes, right? And one of the things we did in working with real users and going out and watching how they actually live their lives, we began to learn that one of the key things was that this doesn't tell you very much. Sure, you're surfacing data, but it's not in a very intelligible way. It doesn't fit with the mental models of the user. It doesn't necessarily provide a lot of value. Sure, it performed well, right? It measures accurately. But what we found was that people didn't really know, is this good or bad? It says high blood sugar, but should I be worried? Was it because I ate a donut this morning? Is it part of a trend? How would I know? So beginning to think about how you actually create better cognitive connection with the user. We took this information before any product definition had happened, right? And said, let's begin looking at different ways in which you can visualize that data, that you can play that data back that increases the value of the product. So this isn't just choosing data visualization for design aesthetics. This is really about what is the function of the product, what's the value being created. One of the things we began to realize was that different design patterns and design languages would be more useful. So after that exploration, we came up with 3 different languages and tested them with users to figure out which one made the right sense. Again, this is all happening before you're building any flows or wireframes. This is all very early on, and this is crucial to getting the product right. So here you can see that now we can use color to say, are you good? Should you be worried? What is my trend? I can now begin to have a more consistent experience that provides more value. Probably the key thing that is not happening today that should be happening at the pragmatic design level is that when you're thinking about data, you're thinking about those externalities. You're thinking about what kind of target data should we capture above and beyond our product, right? If you think about Facebook, for instance, they probably thought, well, it's a good idea to capture likes. Likes are part of that social kind of connectivity. But at the end of the day, those likes are very powerful from a business standpoint. They create a lot of data, a lot of value. The ability now for us to build in interactions, to build in components that capture and measure data for the business's future use is incredibly important. You can't add these after the fact, right? They have to be part of the product design process. And if you're not thinking about them, I guarantee you're not architecting to manage that data correctly. You get into the eBay problem, right? So part of the problem is that the traditional design process is very linear. It has to be by nature, right? Typically, you identify the need, you devise a model for creating value, you determine the market characteristics, you define a proposed business model, you create the right concepts, you define the requirements, concept design, validate, refine, build, right? Well, very linear process. And to some degree, you have to do it this way. But when you're designing with data, when you're thinking about data, actually you need to take a slightly different approach. Because the linear process, by nature, is really focused on a one-to-one approach to a problem or solution. And designing with data, we want to begin to expand our thinking, go beyond that one-to-one. And this is very important because today, we're moving from a world where people interact with devices individually to actually people using multiple devices for a single service to people actually expecting that a company, regardless of what touch point we're using, knows everything about us and keeps us connected together. So that takes us to level 2 about designing with data. Because part of the problem with product design is being linear and being somewhat focused on the product. We're not looking across the whole spectrum of use, right? So that's where we need to begin to expand our thinking. Now, we're not going to throw away the value of pragmatic design. We still need that craft, that integrity to create the right kind of product. But from a business standpoint, we've got to understand that that design does not leverage up. We have to have another level of design that deals with this. So that I call reference design. So design creates reference frameworks to help maintain coherency across products and services while developing at the speed of market. Now, your product teams can't be doing this because they're focused on products. And in some cases, you want a more experienced, broader skill set doing this work. So we tell a lot of our clients, look, you have a great design organization, a great design team, but you're not looking at this big picture. You need to be able to pull this in. And there's different approaches. It's not the same tool set and craft set that a UX UI designer is using. You're now beginning to do things like service design. Service design is a process for designing customer experiences across multiple product touchpoints and use contexts. A lot of people today, when you say service design, they think about designing interfaces for digital services. But really, service design is about thinking about the entire customer journey and potentially multiple products. So the key artifact of a service design approach is what's called the service blueprint. A service blueprint is a wonderful tool for organizations, right? Now, you have to have the processes that collect the right information. You have to work with stakeholders to make sure that people understand what's going on. But what a service blueprint actually does is it helps you identify customer needs across different stages of the customer lifecycle. It helps you map the insights and themes, so some of that data that you can collect early on, to different stages. It helps you understand the business needs and business goals at different stages. What are we trying to accomplish? It helps you understand what role the touch points, which could be different products, are playing, right? And it allows you to think about what are the kind of experiences, what are the kind of services needed. It's literally a way of saying, now we can think beyond the bounds of a single product. Now we can think across multiple things. Question, is Facebook a single product? No, it's multiple products. We think of it as a single one. Now, if those products were not thought of in a holistic way, they're not going to work well together. They're not going to create that kind of value. The service design approach allows you to think about multiple products operating either in the same channel or across different channels across time. And it's crucial. And it's very important for designing with data, because now when we think about all these different touch points, we may have data coming from multiple products and services at multiple times. We also may require data from other services. So a service blueprint really expands that customer journey into something much more useful for thinking about creating value. So on the one hand, and I should say that a service blueprint, when done right, these stages can be any stage that you need them to be. At a very, very macro level, it could be awareness, consideration, purchase, usage, support, et cetera. But it could also be stages of a task. But what it does is allow you to look at the needs, the touch points, and the interactions and the business goals. And you can begin to take advantage of this and say, if we've architected correctly, if we've built the right kind of platform, we should be able to create coherent interactions across all products and service touch points. We shouldn't have gaps. We shouldn't have, we can't do this for you because that's in another service. We should also allow the business to have that single unified view of the customer. And again, if you've architected your platform correctly. So again, this is beyond the bounds of a single product, but it's very important for business to understand as they're making investments in a platform. Secondly, using this kind of tool allows you to begin to understand, are there gaps in value? Are there areas where we may not be doing enough to meet the need? Right? We're leaving money on the table. Or are we doing more than is actually needed? Did we think it was important, but nobody's really caring about it? So now we can optimize and fine-tune where we put our effort. And then thirdly, we can begin to identify key contexts where accessing data across services become important, where we can actually create more value by using data from different sources. So using this kind of tool allows you to begin to think non-linearly. I'm not thinking in the bounds of one product. I can think across time. I can think from multiple different angles. And it means that data is now playing a slightly different role, because now we're thinking about data as a material that's shared across products. We're thinking about data as a way of creating additional value. So when we think this way, if you remember my previous slide that showed the circles linearly across the product lifecycle, we think about a different way of designing. We think about what I would call context design. So with the context, we start with what is a particular setting or situation, right? What are people doing? Could be watching TV. It could be trying to get a ride somewhere. We then begin to think about what are the devices and actors involved? Who plays a role? We begin to think about what are their primary relationships, what are their secondary relationships, what is the data flowing between these, right? And now we can begin to look and say, you know what? We can now create certain kinds of interactions and certain value, multiple streams in a single context. Multiple value propositions arise. And this is really the power of taking that service design blueprint approach, of thinking holistically across the customer experience, looking at customer needs, business needs, and how we're actually coming together in terms of the touch points. So an example of this, we worked with a company that had been acquiring all kinds of technology related to the production of digital entertainment, so video, music. And they said, we've got all these products, we've got all these applications, but we don't really have a strategy for how they create more value for the user, which is important because they're a B2B company. What they want to do is say, you use our technology and you'll create better products and services for your client. And we often call this the B2B2C problem, where you have to help the business understand how using something creates more value for their business. So in addressing this, we began looking at the bigger picture, the bigger context, where we look at the content life cycle, so the production of digital content from first filming it or recording it to the distribution and delivery to the consumption. And you look across all the range of providers and you look across all the different ways that users can access this. And what you begin to see is actually the company had a hidden strength. They were capturing and encoding data throughout that they could stream with the content, right? The entire value chain of production contained data that they actually could use for delivering to the consumer and affecting the consumer experience. That allowed them to do something quite compelling. Which was to move from the current mode of consumption into something different. Now today, if you've used any IPTV or iTunes or any of these services, the interfaces tend to be very much like any computer application, right? There's lots of menus, there's lots of information. You can spend a lot of time navigating, right? Great, you can find whatever you want. But when somebody wants to be entertained, the last thing they want to do is spend all their time navigating. So how do you change that paradigm? Well, the current model was that we're using all this metadata, we're pushing it to the user and saying, find what you want. If I want to be entertained, I want to be entertained. Now, is there a way that we can then use, based on the content I'm using, how would the metadata provide other content to me that's relevant? How do we make that more seamless? If you've already encoded lots of data into that stream, you've got something to work with. You've got data as a material. So the approach that we took was to say, the most effective UX, UI ever developed for entertainment was the channel switcher. I don't know how many of you remember TVs that had that dial on it. It then moved to the remote. But really, the easiest way to navigate content is to sit on the sofa and press channel, channel, channel. You learn where the channels are, but that's a very, very intuitive and quick to value UX, right? It doesn't work when you've got multiple providers and lots of content. It begins to break down. But what if we could pull that experience back in? What if we could say the same kind of just press a button to advance would also allow you to now move across related content? What if it's as simple as simply going left, right, up and down to find content? Well, we just need to make sure that this content is somehow relevant to where you are now. If you like that, if that's what you're interested in more of, then simply using a channel switching device would be the fastest way to get more content. Well, how do you do it? One way to do it is by thinking about all of that data that you can put in the stream and thinking about the user's own interactions over time, those positive externalities, to now connect, okay, if you're doing this, here's things that might be relevant to you. Then thinking about multiple devices, because now when we're watching TV, we often have our phone, we may have a pad or a tablet with us. How do these work together? So now I can create a service. If the service is for one device to one device, that's one kind of experience. But what if I have to account for these multiple devices? Well, we have to think about, what about if I'm using them standalone? So I'm watching TV or I'm watching on my device. What about when I'm using them serially? So I'm doing something on the device that affects the TV. What about if I'm doing them in a distributed fashion? So I'm watching TV and I'm interacting with the same service, same content, but doing something different on a device. So we said, by thinking about designing with data, by looking at the contextual approach to this problem, we actually create a solution that is actually kind of groundbreaking. They thought it was groundbreaking enough that they patented this. So the result is that you have an interface, you have a service that allows you to be consuming content on multiple devices. There's a lot of overlays up here, but generally you can be consuming the content. You can be getting entertained and very simply be moving throughout the system and getting additional value. You have to think about things like, how do we make sure that one device is controlling the right other devices? We have to think about things like portability. Can I actually take my device and get my content on someone else's system? So there's a range of things here, but again, by taking that pragmatic design approach with that reference design approach, we're actually able to think about a broader solution. Of course, you have to have a platform underneath this to deliver this. Another example, designing the right product. So again, when you think about those customer journey maps, you think about service design, you began to realize that in some cases, the thing that you thought was the right thing to do may not be the right thing to do. So this gets back to when it's not the perfect product, but in some cases, it might even not be the right delivery mechanism. So I have a video here, and I'll let this play because I think it's a really interesting story. Hopefully it'll play.
As an anaesthetist, what I would do during a long surgical case is obviously keep the patient asleep, but also you're trying to keep the patient stable. And that means I need to have continuous awareness of their blood pressure, the oxygen level within their bloodstream, and a number of other parameters which are vital for the sustenance of life, if you like.
So we developed a head-mounted display which puts that data in the clinician's field of view so they can direct more attention towards the patient and less attention trying to see conventional monitor screens.
When things start to go a little bit wrong, say the patient bleeds rather a lot during the surgery and the blood pressure drops, then my job is to notice that immediately, not after a long delay, and treat it quickly.
The thing that we were briefed on was to build an app for a platform like Google Glass. There's a long list of reasons why these don't necessarily solve the problem. Our approach is to begin with the user, not an engineering specification. So when you follow that path, you can end up in a very different place. Vivi is not a pair of glasses. It's a very different kind of product that solves a real problem for real people.
I mean, there's so many challenges, like the optics needed to be designed, what information is important at what time, then how do you configure the product when you've scrubbed up, even getting data from a conventional patient monitor was a big challenge.
So really what we wanted to do was start from the ground up. We took pieces of Lego and started building with them, creating very, very simple prototypes, and really it was that sort of learning and thinking through building that was really important to what we were doing.
We designed the app, we designed the GUI on the device, we did the industrial design, we did the engineering, we did the gateway device that interfaces with the patient monitor.
We wanted to make sure that the physical device felt comfortable with the application that we were building, and by working on all of the parts concurrently, actually we were able to do that really successfully.
Together, Method and GlobalLogic offer an end-to-end experience design and development service. Vivi leveraged all of this capability to deliver a solution that truly integrates everything in a single approach. The fact is, we didn't just talk about it, we built it.
Going through the process of naming, we came across Vivi, which is Latin for life, and it felt like it was a really great fit for both the product and what we was doing.
We thought we were onto something useful. It just needed that extra step to be taken.
What we achieved with the project is a high-fidelity prototype. Really what it needs now is clinical testing and more rigorous in-theatre action.
You can't get a better opportunity than creating a product that's going to help save people's lives. And that's all about a real-world, practical problem that matters to human beings when they need it most.
So I think that illustrates talking about. So we think about the information of the product definition and design, talking with the real people, thinking about the real issues. We think about that service design, kind of thinking end to end. what data do I need? How do I get it to the right person at the right time? What's the right delivery mechanism? Now, this project originally started with a hippo problem, right? They came to us and said, will you design an application for Google Glass? Someone had thought that's the right thing to do. One of the reasons it's not the right thing to do is because many people wear glasses. Many people wear goggles over their glasses in the OR to prevent spatter. Having another piece on top of that, right, was going to be a problem. The way to solve it is by not assuming that that's the right approach, but stepping back. And again, before you're actually committing to anything, doing that information gathering, thinking about what data do I need, thinking about what's important to do. I should mention that that's a prototype, right? What you saw, everything about that is still a prototype, right? So again, I think it begins to kind of illustrate some of the things we're talking about with design with data. I want to shift gears here a little bit. How many people think that blind people can see? One person. There's an interesting article about a blind man that rides a bicycle. Has anyone heard about this? And the way that he does it is he's developed since a young age a clicking technique that is a kind of an echolocation. And he's trained himself well enough that he can actually ride a bike and can teach other people to do this. And he believes that blind people can see, that socially we're reinforcing that they can't see. Now, what this illustrates actually is that the way our brain functions, the way that we take information in and process it, is actually quite complex and quite wonderful. There was a study done, I think in the 70s, where they created a matrix of little kind of dots that could be raised or lowered. And they connected this to a camera on someone's eyeglasses, and they put it on the back of a blind person. And over time, the brain intuited that sensory perception on the back, and it began to function as sight. So they were able to roughly navigate about as accurately as you would with a fuzzy grayscale camera. They've since done experiments with that with the tongue, right? But the idea is that actually the brain can make sense of information and begin to create kind of awareness through many different kinds of interfaces, right? Even with a cane, if you talk to somebody that uses a cane, it's quite sensitive. They begin to learn a lot and pick up a lot and describe a lot simply by what they feel through this device. We did a lot of work with Samsung to understand what is the nature of how people with disabilities can leverage technology. The flip side of this, especially if we're thinking about designing with data, is that as we get into this more distributed technology environment, as we have more data, we're going to have lots of different kinds of interfaces. The standard GUI is not going to be our primary interface. So for designers who are thinking about designing with data, we need to begin moving away from just data visualization to thinking about different forms of user experience. We did an interesting project. It was for a UX conference that we held in San Francisco a couple of years ago. If I can get this to advance. And it's thinking beyond the GUI. And what we actually did was to create a device that allows you to set a bunch of parameters. And the parameters are things such as what is the sound frequency? The box that we built has a glowing edge. What is the glow? It also has a little circular dial that has light that spins. So what is the frequency, the speed of that spinning? And the idea was that by playing with these different parameters, UX and UI designers could begin to say, well, if we want to create a certain representation of information, we can use these attributes. And then they would basically name the attributes, and they would share with others. And the goal was to see, can you identify what this is trying to communicate? We've actually done projects since this where we've done basically internet devices that use light and light frequency and changes in color to communicate information. But the point being that as a designer, thinking about this world that data is unlocking, we now need to be thinking about lots of different crafts, lots of different things, that there is no existing best practices. We need to begin thinking about how do we now coordinate across a distributed customer experience, interacting with lots of different communication points and touch points that don't necessarily have a digital screen. So beyond the GUI, thinking about voice, how many people have ever worked on a VUI? VUIs are quite complex, right? Because not only do we have the voice recognition challenge, we've got the logic challenge, we've got a semantic challenge, we've got a range of things, even the mental model of does the user think that they're having a conversation? Is that the mentality that they're taking, or do they know that they're navigating the system? Sound is a great natural interface that we're not taking full advantage of. So light, movement, all these things we now begin to need to create the kinds of best practices, toolkits for designers to be able to work with, because the future of our digital experiences, especially driven by data, are going to move beyond the screen. So data is the commodity, it's the new oil. We're going to have this sea of data, right? We hear this all the time. But I think it's interesting to think about what this means. Now, big data, there was a meme floating around the internet a couple years ago that big data was like sex in high school. Everyone's talking about it. Most people have never done it. Most people don't even know what it means, right? I think about big data really as kind of three things. One, there's the plumbing, the ETL. Second is the analysis and the insights. And this is where the focus today is. A lot of people are like, how do I visualize? How do I show relationships and patterns? But I think the most interesting one is the emergent value. What I mean by this is that today, there's a lot of data that is being generated and used in this room. But it's a subset of what is possible. Now, the more devices, the more sensors and actuators, the more things that we enable, the more data becomes available. When we start to think this way, we realize that now it's not about just using data that I have, but thinking about what data can I get? Does it exist from someone? Is there an API I can hit? Or actually, should my product or aspects of my product begin to capture data that hasn't existed before? Thinking about how do I actually generate positive externalities? And I think this is going to be very crucial because if you think about the way in which emergent value of this data is going to be utilized, there's connection, if this then that, there's aggregation, correlation, enhancing experiences, but what we're really talking about is progressive levels of value. Now, there's two kinds of levels of value, moving from things like control and efficiency to limited agency to even self-management. We begin to create a level of quality and differentiation of services. So companies that are thinking holistically, right, not just about the product UX, but about the product experience across the life cycle, are going to now begin thinking about how are we differentiating, how are we doing things that people can't do. Now, there's two ways to do this, right? One is to say, we've got the technology that the others don't have. The other is to say, well, we've got the technology and we're using the data to create value that other people can't. The other side of this is that there will be sophistication of data economies. So today, if you go to a mobile carrier, they've got scads and scads of data that they'd like to get a penny per gigabyte for, right? It'd be great. If you begin to think strategically, now you're going to say, I can create data that no one else will have that will be needed in these situations, right? That's a data economy. But that requires a different way of thinking about data. So it's not about designing with data for the product. It's not about reference design across product. It's thinking across a broader range. So that takes us to design with data level 3. And that's really thinking about strategic design. So for strategic design, I think about design as a tool for strategic plan development and innovation, one that enables and enhances divergent and convergent thinking. Now, at this point, we're not talking about necessarily the practice of UX, UI. We're thinking beyond customer journeys and services because now we're talking about inventing a future. The experience design skill sets are still relevant here, but now we begin to think about a nexus of design, value, business, experience, and data. And in many cases, it's useful to have some kind of framework to begin thinking, how do we bring these together? So one tool that I like is what we call a data product design framework. And what this really considers is, what are our sources of data? So is it stuff that we know we have? Is it stuff that we know we can get? Or is it stuff that theoretically you should be able to get it, right? Do we need to now think about how we get it? Do we have to create a sensor? Do we have to create some way of collecting that? Do we need to build this into our product as the additional target data? And then thinking about based on the data freshness, what kind of value propositions, what kind of things can I do with it? So, for older data, is it understanding patterns and implications? For more fresh data, is it reacting in near real time or real time? Or is it in intelligent anticipation? So the Amazon, Facebook, right, the kind of, if you like this, you might like that. If you liked these things, then you're probably this kind of person. That falls into this pattern, right? And if you are Cambridge Analytics, you begin to realize that, well, you know what? I can create value by looking across this and thinking about what other data can I combine to create a service that provides a particular solution, such as targeting users with the right message. I think IoT is largely in this category, lots of known examples. Intelligent anticipation, the example I'd like to use for this is, I was speaking last year in Kiev, and after my talk, a friend took me out to dinner, and we were walking around, and I said, I want to buy some souvenirs for my kids. So we went to a mall, and he said, oh, you better get money, because most of these small stores don't take credit cards. I'm like, okay, go to the ATM, get some money, buy things, come back. This was December, right? Had a great time. February rolls around, and I'm looking at my online banking statement, and I see a charge. I don't usually get bank charges, so it kind of stood out. I looked at it, I was like, why did I get that charge? It was from a Kiev transaction. I thought, that's odd. So I went to the bank, and I said, can you tell me why I have this charge? Well, because you checked your account in Kiev. I said, actually, I didn't. I took money out, but why would I check my account through a third-party ATM in a different country? Well, sometimes these things take a long time to clear. 2 months, really? Yeah, I wouldn't worry about it. We'll reverse the charges. So I'm thinking to myself, is that really what's going on? What else might be happening? It struck me that if I'm a hacker and I've been collecting data, scraping it from an ATM, I might have a lot of data, and I might want to, over time, test and see, is it still valuable? So if I ping a system and the transaction goes through, good, it still works. But to test that, I want to do it with something that people wouldn't care about, wouldn't think about, wouldn't be out of the ordinary, right? Next day, I went to my bank statement to see if the charge was reversed, and there were 2 charges based in Kiev totaling $1,000. I went to the bank and I said, don't worry, we'll take care of it. I knew they'd take care of it, but I was more worried that they weren't thinking that kind of proactive intelligence. Why should this be happening? This shouldn't be happening. If this is happening, what could it possibly mean? And how would we begin to think about that? Now, the first thing that they should have been doing is saying, let's look at that source. Let's figure out, is that active again? Because it shouldn't be doing anything from that time. So that's the kind of thing that, when we're talking about that category, that's what I mean. Now, what is this useful for? This is useful for thinking about, if we're building a data platform, if we have a data strategy, what data do we have? What data could we have? And who are the users? Who are the potential people that need access to it? What kind of product do they need? What kinds of things, what kinds of value can we be creating for them? So this is really, we have lots of people come to us and say, we want a data interface. We want an analysis engine that can visualize this data, right? We start asking, well, really, that's a single product view. You're saying, I want a single product that does this. Wouldn't it be better to think more holistically about what are the kinds of things you could be doing? What kind of data can you be bringing into the situation that increases the value? So that's the way I think about using this kind of design framework. Now, another framework that I like for this is similar to the context-driven one that I showed you earlier. So here we think about, who is a primary actor or actors in a given situation? What are they trying to do? What is their goal? We then think about, what are their main goals and objectives, right? Which may be different than what is the company trying to do from a product service standpoint. Put yourself in the user's shoes. What is my task? What is my goal? We're thinking about secondary actors. What are other people or services or other people that might be involved? We're then thinking about what are the devices and channels that could be used or are important? What are the services involved? And again, if you think back to that target data we think about how can we generate data that theoretically should be available or could be collected, what other things might we begin to think about putting in that space? Then if we think about what are the data inputs and data outputs that are necessary to help the actor achieve their objective or goal, right? And then we think about what are the previous contexts, where did they come from, and where are they going, right? Because we can open each one of these into one of these models. And this is really a way of understanding what data is available, what devices, services are playing a role, what theoretically we could be doing. Now, I look at this and I see a customer journey rolled into this. With a customer journey, we're thinking about what happens over time and trying to make a cohesive experience. With this framework, I'm thinking about a particular situation, and I'm thinking about how do I expand my awareness and understanding of what could be brought to bear, right? So this particular framework, I think, is easier to use from that standpoint. And this is really an ideation framework where we begin to think about what could we be doing, what is available to us, and how could we be using it. So I'll give you an example of kind of how this plays out. So Electronic Arts, about 6 years ago, came up with the idea that we're monitoring, collecting data from games, from game consoles, across a range of different users and a range of different games. What if you built a social platform that aggregates all that data? What would you do with it? Well, one of the interesting things that came out of that was actually, not only could you use that data to let the user know how they're doing, you could use that data to build a profile, a status, a kind of a definition of the user that might be different from their peers, right? But you could also do things like metagaming, where now your challenges are about doing things across games, not within a specific game. So again, designing with data to create value, to create something that didn't previously exist. Another example of this kind of approach, I gave a talk, if we think about the supply chain, we think about the end-to-end and how data could be used to create more value there. Now, it used to be that supply chain management was about beating up your vendors. How do we get the lowest price, right? Because the lowest price allows me to either deliver the lowest price to the market or have the biggest margin. But modern supply chain management theory actually realizes that the key strategy is about throughput. The faster I can get something through, the faster my capital can come back and be reused. So now it's about optimizing demand and supply. So if I have a view of data across the entire supply chain, if I can create a dashboard, now I've got a much more effective way of thinking about managing the supply chain and my capital more effectively. So the three use cases that this addresses is, first, most mistakes, most problems in the supply chain could have been prevented. If you had access to the data, you would have seen the indications that there was a problem building, right? And you could have dealt with them before they happened. Second is that in many cases, you may need to have multiple scenarios. So given certain demand circumstances, I want one kind of supply chain approach. Given other demand situations, I might need to have a backup. So how would I run those scenarios? How would I begin to look at what should be happening? What are the key indicators? And the third use case was, I may be a company that wants a product, but I've got no experience or capability. Can we actually create ad hoc networks of supply chain components that allow someone to configure a virtual supply chain, build a product, get it to market? Interesting thing about this is that if you look at the identity and that little glyph to the right of the word Elementum, that's actually, for the graphic designers who might be in the room, there's an algorithmic way that that's generated. And you can generate a kind of an endless supply of graphics that are all in that brand identity family by following a certain rule sets. So again, thinking this way can go all the way down to the craft level, all the way up to the strategy level. So the opportunity is thinking about ecosystems, thinking about data ecosystems, and thinking about how we create more value out of data now that we've got all the data to work with. An example of this, I gave a talk last year at an IoT conference, and I said, when you begin to think this way, you begin to create new kinds of emergent opportunities that didn't exist. And the topic that I chose was, how would you use wearables, IoT, and smart TV to create a better user experience, right? Positive value. So started with the idea of wearables. So wearables, sensors that can say, activity, certain presence. There might be apps associated. There's certainly data, and there's connectivity. But the problem with wearables is a pretty soft value proposition. How many people here have a Fitbit? How many people are wearing their Fitbit? So the problem with wearables is that a lot of people buy them, they think it's a great idea, and then they stop using them, right? So what would make a wearable have more value? Why would you want to wear it more? So is there a way we can increase value there? IoT is going to solve everything, right? IoT is the promise of the future, but when you look actually at where is IoT making a difference, it's few and far between. Smart TV, tons of content. How do you find the content, right? Do I need all the services? Can I get it through one service? So what we did was to theorize, if you took that design with data approach, how could you actually create a more seamless experience? One of the other issues with smart TV, when we moved from the linear model of TV to the internet model of TV, we're eroding the economics. We're basically moving away from the ad inventory that goes with linear TV to shifting towards a different kind of ad approach. And if you look at the dollars spent, most of the advertising dollars are beginning to migrate from TV into digital. So the economics of the content production for TV are getting undermined. Can we address the user experience? Can we create value for TV providers, for content providers? Can we create a better user experience? If you design with data, I think you can. So the approach that we took was we said, well, is there data that in this ecosystem that we've never used before that we could actually collect? And there is. There's electrodermal activity. So this is galvanic skin response, right? And many wearables are starting to measure this. What we did was to actually create a prototype and have users wear this. Because we wanted to see, can we track engagement with content? Because EDA is not consciously controlled, can we know whether somebody is actually having a reaction to what they're watching? And what we did was we bought a very low-cost EDA sensor and had a mobile app connected to it, and we had people watch video clips. And it's very interesting because you begin to see patterns, you begin to see curves. Now, different people have different levels of reaction. You look at somebody, and you can see that regardless of how many spikes they have, they're all at the same level. Some people are much higher and lower. But what you do begin to see is that activity correlates with what's going on screen. So the movie Up, which is an animated movie, it's a free animated movie. It's very, very fun, very entertaining. But there's a sad part where the couple who are wanting to have kids realize that they can't have kids. What we saw was that two people watching at different times had a reaction. Now, we know that one person had a reaction because it's the wife of the designer who was running the test, and she had suffered a miscarriage. So she had a reaction when this part of the movie came up. Another person watching it had a similar reaction point. His wife had had a miscarriage. So when we looked across all these different video clips and profiles, we began to realize that you can associate some level of activity with what's going on screen. What do you do with that? Well, if we begin to say, in a contextual setting, thinking about in-home entertainment, I'm watching TV, thinking about devices involved, so I've got a wearable. I may have more than one person watching TV. The wearable can also pull in other data. If it's GPS enabled, it might give me, what's kind of going on in my work and social life in terms of where I travel. I've got the TV, I have an IoT gateway. I've got data going between all these points. So how do we create something from this? Well, if I'm looking at specific unique content viewing, you're watching this show, over time we know how often you watch that kind of genre. Of all your entertainment, how often do you watch crime dramas, right? How long do you watch them, right? Do you watch the whole thing? Do you watch bits of it? Do you really care? Do you have explicit ratings? Did you like things? Did you not like things? Were things your favorite? We could begin to correlate this with your EDA pattern. So did you have spikes? we could say, over time, normalized for your individual activity, was this high engagement or low engagement? And we can correlate it against what's the semantic timeline, what's going on in the show, right? Do you watch lots of crime dramas, but what really gets you is the car chases, right? Then we can also look at the unique user behavior associated with the wearable. So if the wearable is basically saying, this is you and not you, we know your viewing habits, the time of day, the kinds of things you watch. We know where you go on a daily basis. We begin to associate other data we might access with your unique user ID. The combined set of all this information allows us to do something kind of interesting, which is when people are watching TV, number one, if you don't like the content, if it's not engaging you, we can suggest content that might be more engaging. If two people who have very different tastes are looking, we can find content that is potentially likely to engage both of them. Number three, we should be able to sell the ad inventory on a dynamic market to people who are looking for a particular type of demographic, where we can now say, if you want to get that demographic who is highly engaged in the content, these are the shows that you want to be advertising on. And fourthly, because we've got that geo footprint, we can also say, and this can incorporate location-based advertising. So now you can not only target people that match a profile at a level of engagement, but also give promotions to them that are very much about where they live and work in the world. So in a sense, what we're suggesting and showing is that we can increase the value of the wearable, because now the wearable is my connection to the system. We can increase the value of how I access content, because now content finds me more effectively, and we can actually begin to kind of underwrite or support the economic model by introducing a new level of advertising efficiency that didn't previously exist. So it's a bit of a pipe dream, right? But it's actually feasible. You could actually be doing this. Summary so far, so we've got that businesses today are building and operating software-driven value chains, engaging customers to digital channels. This is different than the way people have thought in the past. We've got the amount of data created is large and growing and is valuable if you know what to do with it. We've got design can be focused in different ways, pragmatically, reference, and strategic. And these are different ways of thinking about design that address data differently. And we've got data's role is shifting from insights relevant to a single product development lifecycle to things that span across the entire business. So with that, what I want to do is give you guys a little test, okay? So question, designing with data. Here's an ecosystem. This is real world, okay? So in the real world, you have consumer packaged good brand owners, right? And they create things that are sold through channels, right? And they want to sell more of what they have. So one thing that they do is there are retail promotion management companies that will work with the CPG brand owners and the distribution channels to say, we're going to run this promotion, okay? So right now, they email spreadsheets back and forth. They say, what are you running, what products, for how long? The retailers decide which stores have it based upon their inventory. These guys then manage that to create all of the print circulars, shelf end stickers, define the labor need to actually kit the store out for that promotion. And then they work with third-party vendors. These guys do a point-of-sale promotion. So some of the promotions are not just on shelf, but they'll show up in the register tape after you've purchased something. And this is all to get lower prices to the consumers, hopefully sell more product. Well, if you look at where these companies are innovating, what they're thinking of doing, these guys are saying, rather than emailing spreadsheets, why don't we build a campaign planning as a service platform? Good idea, right? Okay. These guys are thinking about, in addition to the analog printouts, can we do digital promotions, right? These guys are thinking about, beyond just doing, what did you buy, here's a promotion that's printed out, could we actually do that as a service that could go to any digital device? Pretty interesting, right? Makes a lot of sense. But when you go to the CPG guys, and you say, what is your problem? They say, what's going on is that loyalty, brand loyalty, does not guarantee sales. What we need to do is we need to understand how we affect the decision-making process at the point that the decision is happening. We need to somehow understand how we affect that behavior when the person is ready to make the purchase, not after they've made it. We don't just want to blanket everything. We want to be able to actually understand who, where. So my question to you all is, with this view of designing with data, what's a solution? What's an approach? Okay. Anyone? So, first approach you might think is, well, let's develop a mobile app, right? We'll develop a mobile app, and then we can push coupons to the customer. Okay. You could do that, right? Problem is, how do we get the person to actually take that mobile app? How do we get them to download it? How do we get them to use it, right? Another approach could be, you know what? If we have the MAC address of the phone, if we can associate this with past purchases, we should be able to understand how frequently a person buys. Are they likely to be at a point where they're ready to buy again? And are they in a physical place where they can buy? How would we now prompt them to buy? We could send a text message. Don't need an app. We could just send a text. Hey, you're in the aisle. Did you know that cookies are on sale? Right? Or for you, you can buy 2 for price of 1, right? We could even have smart signage on the shelf that knows it's me. I don't take my phone out of my pocket. I walk down the aisle, a little flasher that says, here's the promotion. My point being that when you begin to think about designing with data across these different levels, you begin to think in different ways. And you begin to moving from things like, oh, we can do an app, to we can do different kinds of interfaces, different kinds of ways of delivering and leveraging data. So thank you all. I hope this is something that you all can work with, because I know that designing with data is coming, and it's something that we all have to be thinking about. Thanks a lot.
We'll just take one question if anybody has for Patrick. All right? We have the winner.
The problem is, since the data is connected from the PCs or whatever, the IoT, there is a data shadow following. There is a data shadow which is always watching me what I am doing. Now, is there any process like, let's say, automobile components, where we put them into a process, the system will check them, whether the design model is right to capture the data. Is there such a system is needed for these approaches? Because we don't know. On a blue moon, one guy comes up, gives an app, everyone with their intentions we don't know, but we use those devices and they still shadow us. So
There's a bunch of things that come with that. Number one is, what is the right data to be using? Right? With all the data, how do we pick the data that's most relevant? Right? And I think number one, we're going to see systems that will learn what's the most relevant data. Right? So we can begin to look at machine learning to say, what are the right things to track for? I think there's other issues that come along with it that we have to think about. One is security and privacy. So what data should be allowed to be used? Who owns that data? We will see a shift in terms of consumer data and who owns it and how you access it. But there's a lot of data that will not be consumer data that we can also use. Probably the most important point that we need to think about is what I call data integrity. We have no idea if we're taking data in, whether that data is actually real or not. We could create data that will drive a driverless car off the road, off a cliff. The car will think it's going down a highway until it explodes. The point being, we've got no way to ensure that the data we're using is actual real data from the right source. That's probably the biggest weakness of the whole approach. But if you look at everything we talked about, from pragmatic design with data to reference design with data to strategic design with data, a lot of what we're talking about is yet to come. There's still a lot of value in design with data that we can get today. And most businesses don't have the mindset to leverage the value that exists today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Patrick, if you could just be deep dive. It was a deep dive. Fantastic session. A huge round of applause to Patrick. And I would like to request Prakash to present a token of our appreciation to Patrick for doing a wonderful, wonderful session. And of course, it was amazing. What do you think, Prakash?
Absolutely.
That's for Patrick.
Very nice. Thanks a lot, Patrick.
Thank you very much.
This was a great session.
Thanks for having me.
Sure.